Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me as chair of the Strategic Advisory Group on Environmental Emergencies to welcome you all to the Environmental Emergencies Forum here in Oslo this year. I can almost promise you the kind of weather you saw on the beginning of this slide tomorrow here in Oslo. But today, I've been told by the Met Office that it's not going to get much worse than we have already outside the windows. To formally open the biannual forum, I'm happy to present Director General Jon A. Lea of the Norwegian Civil Protection Directorate. Jon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear participants of the 2015 Biannual Environmental Emergencies Forum, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to Oslo and to Holmenkollen Park Hotel. As some of you, I think just some of you, might know, the Holmenkollen ski jump is for many Norwegians, it's 500 meters from here, for many Norwegians the ultimate symbol of our dedication to, and some might even say, obsession with winter sports. So what has this to do with the EEF? Well, from my point of view, working with environmental prevention and preparedness demands both dedication and, at times, a small dose of obsession. But we're moving in the right direction. It's no coincidence that the Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection plays a key role in the work of Strategic Advisory Group on Environmental Emergencies and the EEF. Norway has been a staunch supporter of the collaboration between UNEP and OCHA. That Norway is taking lead of the SAGE and arranging this conference is a solid expression of this support. So to the matter at hand, I would like in this opening address just to highlight 4 specific points. And the first, even more emphasis should be put on prevention activities, especially in the field of environmental emergencies. Conferences like the EFF and high-level meetings such as the one in Sendai this year must strive to promote such a view across the boards and sectors. The second, with regard to environmental disasters, local capacity building should be a priority. Work in the field of prevention reduces the need for international response and gives the local communities ownership and a way to deal with their own challenges. And the third one, the secondary effect of environmental disasters must be highlighted. An oil spill can cause deterioration of groundwater and in that way turn the local population into internal displaced persons. These forms of cascading effects is something that needs to be looked closer at. And the last one, not least, public-private cooperation in the field of environmental disaster is an area we should explore more. During the conference here in Oslo, we have made a start by putting this specific topic on the agenda. Okay, on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Directorate for Civil Protection, I wish you all a fruitful and engaging conversations and a successful conference. Thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, on behalf of the United Nations Environment Programme, I would like to extend my best wishes on this, the occasion of the first Environmental Emergencies Forum being held. Let me also say that we are extremely grateful for the Kingdom of Norway to host this forum, and also for the partnership that has brought the Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs of the United Nations and the United Nations Environment Programme together in a partnership that speaks not only to the urgency and also to the necessity of bringing the disaster and emergency management communities together with the environmental communities. As many of you know and will know much better than I do, the prospect for the future is one in which our work, particularly at the interface of emergencies and accidents and disasters and their impact on the environment, and through the impact on the environment also on people and their welfare, will become an ever more present danger for all of us. Our objective and also our appreciation to those who have organized this forum is to ensure that we try and understand better what we have learned from the past, how we can better align our efforts, and above all, how we can ensure that less damage occurs when natural disasters take place, when industrial accidents happen. Indeed, our lessons learned often point to the fact that we could reduce both the impact on people and the environment significantly if we were better prepared, whether as a result of natural disasters, be they floods, earthquakes, or other extreme weather events. Very often, the way that we have managed the environmental context has often either contributed to exacerbating the impacts of these disasters and accidents, or indeed reduced them. Therefore, the focus on preparedness and also reducing the risks is certainly a very significant one, in which our communities must both work more actively together and bring the lessons to the broader policy arena, globally and nationally. Secondly, our capacity to respond during the phase of an accident or a disaster or an emergency has also provided many lessons. Our ability and also the lessons that we have learned in our joint unit that we operate on environment and emergency issues between OCHA and UNEP has allowed us to appreciate both the benefits of working together and the capacity to respond quickly. Often it is in the hours, days and weeks after an emergency or a disaster that the kind of work that we can do will determine whether damage can be contained or indeed will become much greater. And indeed what is also important is that we have over time recognized that in the phase after the immediate emergency is over, much can be done to reduce the impact on people and the environment of these emergencies. Again, our ability to close the loop, if you want, between the immediate response and the capacity to reduce risks in the future is determined in large part by the kinds of activities that we put in place immediately following these emergencies. Your discussions, your deliberations, but also your messages, not least into the broader global arena, where this year the development of a new set of Sustainable Development Goals would either help or hinder our efforts, is extremely important. I thank you once again for coming together in Oslo and for all the work that you do every day across the planet. Without you, without the competence and the capacity and also the institutional strength that we can bring to these issues, many people, and indeed the world's environment, would be far worse off. I wish you a very successful meeting in Oslo and look forward to working with all of you through the work that UNEP can contribute to this community in the future. Thank you.
Greetings to all of you, and a very warm welcome to the Environmental Emergencies Forum. It's my great pleasure to speak to you as one of my first duties as the new Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs. I'm only so very sorry I can't be with you in Oslo today. This forum represents more than 20 years of collective experience and joint action in preventing and responding to environmental emergencies. It has constantly looked for ways to reduce the vulnerability we all face as the risk of disasters rises and is compounded by climate change, by environmental degradation, and by technological hazards. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, agreed last March, was unquestionably a very important step. And I think we all know we must do more, a lot more. Managing environmental risks is a critical part of all our work to anticipate, to prevent, and to mitigate crises. And when disaster strikes, we have to address its environmental impact during the very first phase of our response. We need to support recovery without harming the environment or contributing to its degradation. OCHA and UNEP are committed to supporting Member States in addressing risks from technological hazards. We will make sure that these risks are reflected in discussions at the World Humanitarian Summit at the end of May next year. So I hope this forum will come up with some proactive, positive, practical and innovative recommendations, and that you will find the tools, the knowledge and the inspiration you need. I really thank you for your participation, and I do wish you all the very best. Good luck.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wendy Q. I'm the Chief of the Joint United Nations Environment Program, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs Environment Unit, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Jan Egeland, who really doesn't need an introduction. Jan is currently the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He previously served as the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator from 2003 to 2006. He is the humanitarian for humanitarians, having also worked on this issue from many different perspectives, including as Secretary General of the Norwegian Red Cross with the Norwegian government. And the video of him as humanitarian superhero has 12 million hits on YouTube. Mr. Egeland, kindly share with us your views on the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead of us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wendy. Friends, it's good to see you all here in Holmenkollen. I was very glad to be asked to speak here. I know how important it is that the governmental sector, the intergovernmental sector, the non-governmental sector, the private sector, the scientific sector, we all come together to build resiliency, build preparedness, build prevention, build response. When we succeed, countless lives are saved. When we fail, as we have too often done globally, it's counted in lives lost and too many people being displaced. So allow me then, for the next 30 minutes of our lives, to go through a few challenges, but also opportunities for better action in our common cause, which is to help the most vulnerable to become more resilient to the hazards that are there and that are building around the world. And let me start with presenting humanity as it lives on the planet. This is us. It's a great map done by National Geographic magazine. It shows how many we are, where we live, and how rich we are. So a lot of color means a lot of people. No color means very few people. You can see Norway is nearly empty of people, a few around Oslo here. There are Europe, certainly India, China, east coast of the United States, of Brazil, heavily populated now, big parts of the Middle East, and even Africa, south of Sahara now. So 2 takeaways here. In the 30 years that I've been a humanitarian worker, more than 30 years, I started in the 1970s as a young volunteer in Colombia, Latin America. In this more than a generation that I've been around, there has been phenomenal population growth, and there's been phenomenal economic growth in the world. When I was in school in Norway, all all who were not the blue industrialized areas, still blue, still rich areas, were virtually yellow, poor areas, less than $1,000 per capita per year. Now, as you will see, world has had not only the blue, we, the rich, have become even richer. Large parts of the world has now had a phenomenal economic growth and a phenomenal increase, like we have had for a long time, increase in consumption. When I was born in 1957, there was not yet 3 billion inhabitants on the planet. Today we're 7. 1 more billion per 13 years, and it will continue until we're 10. And that will be just after I am supposed to die, which is around 2050. The world has never seen such a growth. In my lifetime, world population will more than triple. It has happened also in my mother's period, from less than 2 billion to 7. In my time, from 3 to more than 9 billion. This has not happened before in human history, and it will never happen again. Second thing, my time here, consumption has grown 500–600%. Purchasing power has in the same period increased in China with 1,200%. There is a lot of possibilities to live better, but also a lot of possibilities to over-consume in this world. Final point. Never before have we seen such a distance between the richest blue and the poorest yellow on this map. You know, they say around 1815 or so, the richest nations were 3 times richer on average than the poorest nations on earth, meaning we were all poor. Now, the richest nations, including this one, are 200 times richer than the poorest yellow nations. This is also has never happened before in human history, and it just shows how big the inequality globally has become. The richest 5 individuals on earth are richer than the poorest 2 billion individuals. The distance between the top and the bottom has never been bigger, but there's never been a bigger global middle class to be able to lift up the poorest again. So challenges and opportunities. Now going on to natural disasters. I now work with displacement. I'm head of the Norwegian Refugee Council. We count displacement events around the world. All of these, with color, had people, substantive numbers of people displaced by natural disasters. The ones that are with lines, cross lines, were the most heavily affected. The ones with deep orange color had more than 50,000 people displaced by natural disasters. Natural disasters affect all nations, basically, but they affect disproportionately the poor. And it has become a bigger scourge in terms of displacement than all wars and conflicts combined. So, my agency in Geneva counts the number of people displaced by war and the number of people displaced by natural disasters. And this is our tally. From 3 to 10 times more people are displaced by natural disasters in our time and age than by conflict. Even though conflicts are horrific in this period of history, including Syria, which is the worst war causing displacement in a generation. So who's displaced? Again, 97% of everybody forced out of their homes because of natural disasters live in developing countries. Even though the hazards, the elements, the storms, the earthquakes affect basically north, south, east, west relatively equally, the robustness of people are much stronger when you are heavily developed and you're rich. So 97% of all displaced from 2008 to 2013 in developing countries. And there are many more now than before. This is a graph we did based on information decade by decade since 1970s. Well, since I started as a very young volunteer in this work. 4 times more people are displaced by natural disasters on average now as in the 1970s. 4 times more. So you correct that for a doubling in world population, and you still get twice as high a likelihood to be displaced now from natural disasters than in the 1970s. We're twice as exposed. So 3 reasons for this dramatic increase. More people in a growing world population are more exposed to more extreme weather, which is climate induced. Now, is it only the poor who are affected? No. This is Fukushima, Japan. I will rate Japan among the very top in being well prepared to natural disasters. After the Kobe earthquake in 1995, there was a massive investment in Japan for earthquake, and for that matter, tsunami preparedness. When Fukushima happened, earthquake plus tsunami, triggered by the earthquake, we ended up, however, with a whole series of catastrophic events, and as I understand it, 100,000 hectares of soil are still long-term affected by the spills and the atomic leak, causing long-term displacement in one of the most sophisticated nations in terms of disaster preparedness on Earth. We are all vulnerable. We all need to revisit our plans and our preparedness. Of course, connected to the explosion in population and in consumption, we also have the water crisis that are affecting an increasing number of nations. I was not myself aware of the effect it has had on the greatest lake of the Middle East, Urmia. This is Lake Urmia. I mean, the sand-colored areas was the biggest lake of the Middle East in Iran. It has lost 95% of its surface water. 95%. It's will seriously affect 50 million people in Iran, according to the Vice President's environmental advisor. It is a crisis that can not easily be dealt with by that nation. I was myself in 2 other lakes in Africa, Lake Chad. I was on the Niger side, and we traveled for a whole day in land cruisers in what was a complete desert what was strange with that desert in Niger was that there was a lot of shells and shellfish in the desert, and occasionally a boat here and there. Why? Because it had been part of Lake Chad. It was now completely desert. I was also in Lake Fagibin in Mali, north of Timbuktu. Gone. Huge lake, very central to the ancient kingdom of Timbuktu, when Timbuktu was one of the civilization centers of the world. Gone the lake, gone that civilization with the lake. The water crisis, because of overconsumption and climatic change, as a challenge, it cannot be overemphasized. Nor can urbanization. Again, I'm looking at these 30 years of work of mine. Urbanization is a megatrend. 200,000 people per day are urbanized. 70% of the world population will be in cities by 2015. Already, more than half of us, for the first time in human existence, a majority living in urbanized areas, 70% by 2050. For refugees, it means that we today do not work in refugee camps, first and foremost. We work by people displaced within cities or to cities. They live in the streets, they live in collective centers, they live under bridges, they are refugees in urban areas. Urban areas can be well planned, they can be robust, or they can become death traps. It could have gone even much worse in the Kathmandu Valley with the earthquake, because it has now become a heavily, densely populated area with the large earthquake there. Some of the megacities of the world are very disaster prone, and preparedness, prevention, is not up to the challenge. Now, what will happen if we do not meet these challenges? Well, I think we will see more of this. Boats in the Mediterranean, full of people fleeing, or in the Andaman Ocean, Southeast Asia, like the Rohingyas these days, people fleeing from a combination of factors, which are war, conflict, bad governance, natural disasters, environmental degradation, water shortages, no work, no hope, no future, so we need to travel. But here's I'm now gone through challenges, many of them. There are also opportunities. It can be changed. I mean, the inherent vulnerability of people can be overcome. Here's two graphs of 3 small island states in the Caribbean. 1960s, from 62 to 71, and then last decade, 2002 to 2011. Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. Cuba was the second most disaster-prone of these in the 1960s. Had a considerable number of people died from natural disasters per year, although not as many as Haiti. You go up to previous decade and you see that Cuba doesn't really have fatalities with the cyclones and the hurricanes anymore. Haiti, as vulnerable as they has always been. No positive change, no improvement. Because there was in Cuba something we have not seen in Haiti, a government that systematically gave emphasis to preparedness, to prevention, to public education on disasters, and to building resilience. Better buildings, better everything. So that's the Caribbean. What about Asia? Well, let's look at the case of Bangladesh. I remember as a young boy going around, mobilized by my mother and others, to collect money for the cyclone victims in Bangladesh every other year, and we're talking now about the 60s and the 70s. In 1970, 500,000 people were killed because of cyclones in Bangladesh. I could also do the handheld mic, perhaps. Bangladesh being among the most disaster-prone countries, most vulnerable societies on earth. Up until early 90s, this was the case. In 1991, oops, there you go. In 1991, 140,000 people died in a huge cyclone that left 10 million homeless in Bangladesh. In 2007, a new tropical cyclone hit, Cedar it was called. It was stronger than the 1991 cyclone. 4,200 people died. So compare 140,000 dead with 4,200. What happened in Bangladesh? Well, systematic work in that society, government, civil society, international organization, non-governmental organization, working together with systematic early warning, preparedness, cyclone centers, education, better building standards, learning from past mistakes. Today, still a relatively poor country, but much more resilient to natural disasters. It is possible. It is indeed possible. One thing we can build on in the future, I think, are better climate services, better climate forecasting. I have worked for long in something, well, what's this? Well, two examples of climate services. One is the food insecurity forecast that UN agencies are putting forward in Africa. Deep red, fears of famine. This is an old one. Don't be alarmed. This is an old one. It's an example of how we have worked. Red means famine. Green means no alert. A lot of variables come together in doing this food insecurity warning, everything from climate forecasting in terms of the element, precipitation, etc., the number of livestock, the food consumption patterns, all sorts of indicators come together. As a number of indicators come together, when China does its regular forecasts of wildfires, danger of wildfires, or as China also has a lot of forecasts of first frost, which is important for those who want to harvest, or flooding warnings, etc. you can forecast much more than before, and that's why the World Meteorological Organization, after a high-level task force that I chaired, proposed to the world a global framework for climate services, which will, little by little, churn out advice, warnings, forecasts in many areas: health, agriculture, water management, and humanitarian work around the world. And the scientists, the satellites, everything will come together in predict how and when things will happen. This is not just important for tropical areas. Of course, permafrost yielding, ending because of global warming, lots of forecasts, as you know about that, will lead to infrastructure in this Arctic north being affected. Climate change, global climate change, will affect us all. However, when we look at robustness, we again come back to the fact that the more they need forecasting, the more vulnerable they are, the worse the forecasting becomes. And here's an indication of why. Blue dots are functioning meteorological stations giving regular information about temperature, wind, precipitation, etc., rainfall, etc., etc. Yellow, green, red are various stations sending less and less information. The red one being defunct, not functioning. The yellow one giving functioning in less than 30% of the time, etc. Is there a trend in that image? Well, yes. Here in Europe, we have too much information, actually. Too much. Or perhaps not never too much, but more than enough. And when in places like Africa, even parts of Latin America, the island areas, etc., much less information available, and therefore worse warnings, worse forecasting. So to me, this is of course part of the tremendous injustice we see. Those who caused climate change, or we who caused climate change, are least and last hit, in part because we're so robust. Those who did nothing to cause climate change are first and hardest hit because they are so vulnerable, in part because there is much less information available of what will hit them when. That kind of a climate injustice has to change. Now, so I'm ending with this image of a building that have collapsed recently in Nepal because buildings and society was ill-prepared for earthquake. We can only break the cycle of vulnerability if we work together. Governments, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, scientific community, private sector, scientists. There has to be north-south transfers, and there has to be south-south transfers of experience, of good practice. I mean, if Cuba and Bangladesh can improve their robustness 100-fold, or rather reduce their vulnerability 100-fold in a generation, of course, so can Haiti and other places. If we have good forces, locally, regionally, internationally, coming together. It's a question of better development, better planning, better governance. It's all possible. So I'm an optimist. I think we can meet these challenges because we've shown many places that we can. But it has to be a big investment, and there has to be more understanding that it's a common global, in the age of climate change, it's a common global responsibility to meet this challenge together. And we who cause climate change should certainly, and it's not just the northwest corner. I mean, there are many nations now with the capacity to support those who are the most vulnerable. And that's the whole thing, support and make the most vulnerable more resilient. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. We'll have a chance to go in depth on some of those topics that you raised throughout the conference ahead of us. So now I would like to invite Dr. Ramamani to challenge us to think differently about the task before us. Dr. Ramamani is the co-founder of Rising Women, Rising World, a community of women that aim to pioneer a better future. As a counselor with the World Future Council, she helps to identify policy solutions to climate change to protect the rights of future generations. She serves on the jury of the Right Livelihood Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. She addresses critical global issues through her creative performances to foster innovative policy dialogue. She's a peace builder, poet, and performer, and today she'll grace us with a performance specifically designed for our forum.
Hello?
Yes.
Very good. Well, since I was honoring you, I'll have to start all over again. So I will say it again because it deserves to be said again, which is on top of the honor of being invited here to both give this short opening presentation and support some of the special activities throughout the next few days. Above all, I'm here to honor you. Each one of you, and as well as each one of your colleagues, the thousands of people that you work with in your organizations at every level, in your countries, at local level, regional level, national level, and global level. And in particular, there are three characteristics of the way in which you approach your work in environmental emergencies that you may find just normal, just part of a day's work, but which I find truly remarkable and worth highlighting and emulating in all other sectors. The first one is, in this era of dramatic climate change, there's also a climate of short-termism, of quick solutions, quick fixes, grabbing low-hanging fruit, of short attention spans. But you come to every single issue with the long-term view. As we've just heard from Jan Egeland, you work not just as soon as the alarm bells ring, rushing in to respond appropriately, but you're working far beyond that before the situation erupts on preparedness and after the situation has erupted in rebuilding resilience. So this long-term view is so critical for the world we live in today. The second one is what you bring is synergy. You work from all the way from the local level to the national level to the international level, building on the synergies of working across sectors and across levels. And this is fundamental for your success. And that's what you do time in and time out. But I think the most important, which make the other two so relevant, are the human qualities that you bring to your work day after day, night after night, because we know how emergencies tend to happen, mainly in the middle of the night, just before Christmas or just before an important holiday. And you are there with these human qualities time and again. The first one is creativity, because we know now, with the fragility of the Earth, that every environmental emergency is partly or wholly unprecedented. So however experienced you are, how many ever disasters you've seen, this is new. And you don't despair, you just roll up your sleeves, take out yet another new thinking cap, and find the creative, innovative solution that's going to work over here. The second one is your courage. Already a disaster is bad enough, but in an environmental emergency, there is the unknown and the invisible. There are all the things that could happen, the leaks of dangerous materials, the toxic waste of radiation that affects your health now, as well as in the long term. And while every living being is running away, you go into those situations. But the third and most important, the defining part of your work is compassion. And you combine two kinds of compassion which are fundamental for the survival of our life on Earth. Compassion for fellow beings and compassion for the Earth itself, which sustains us. So for what you do day in and day out, every day of the year, around the world, in countries far-flung, to honor that, I would like to just bring this to life by focusing on one situation of the many you work on, which is Syria. And I'll do it in the way that I enjoy most, which is through storytelling. Hello, I'm James Le Mesurier from the United Kingdom. You know, I thought I could deal with any crisis that came my way. After all, I'd been deployed in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Iraq, the Middle East. I'd been sent to Aceh the moment the tsunami burst out. I'd built terror-proof and disaster-resistant installations in the Gulf. I'd even worked for a security company that did emergency relief work. But when the barrel bombs started falling in Syria, when our Syrian colleagues started telling us what they were like, I was dumbfounded. You know, we are used to dealing with disasters one at a time. But imagine this. One barrel bomb is an earthquake of 7.6 on the Richter scale. Imagine 57 every day. What do you do with that? Then someone told me to go to see Akut, you know, the Turkish earthquake response unit. When we started talking, light bulbs went on. We knew we couldn't just bring in an earthquake rescue in the middle of a war zone, but we could design something different. So we brought together a team of volunteers from Syria, from different parts, and earthquake experts, and we had a design lab. We tore the rule book apart and put it all together again. and we organized the first search and rescue training lab. We brought 25 volunteers from Aleppo. They were just ordinary guys, taxi drivers, plumbers, bakers. They'd never done humanitarian work before. But when we started the training, they were hooked. They went back with 1 week of training and a little backpack with some supplies. In 24 hours, we got a thank you message from them with a photograph of the first family they'd saved from a barrel bomb. We knew we were onto something. We set up Mayday Rescue here to coordinate and collect international aid and supplies and to provide regular training and coordination. But the real work was done by them. They have set up 105 Syrian civil defense units. We call them the White Helmets. There are now 12,500 volunteers all over Syria. 220,000 people have been killed, but they've already saved 18,000. But just remember this, 57 earthquakes every day for 1,555 days, and still counting. Salam. I am Abdel Malik. I served in the National Fire Service of Syria. But when the revolution started, I saw that when the opposition forces took a town, the regime would cut off all the supplies, water, electricity, fuel, food. I did not agree, so I deserted. I could see that with the bombs falling, people needed my help. So I got some volunteers and taught them everything I know. And we set up a small fire service. When we heard of the White Helmets, the Syrian civil defense units, we joined hands with them. We also received training in Turkey. We set up fire services in every part of Syria. When we are not rushing to save people from the bombs, we help our communities. We clear the rubble from the streets. We try to reconnect the lines to provide some services. We rebuild the roads. We try to build up the strength of our people before the next bombing. One day there was heavy shelling, so I told my team, "You wait, I will go and check the situation." But a bomb exploded just in front of me. You know, it was the civilians I had gone to save who dragged me to safety. By the time I reached a field hospital, I had bled too much. They had to amputate my leg, here, above the knee. When my team came to see me, I said, "Do not despair. Do not stop the work you are doing." They said, "Don't worry. Nothing will make us stop." But when they left me, I wept. I thought I would never be able to help my people again. But I was lucky. Our international friends helped us, and they got me this artificial leg. The day that I could walk again, I reported back to service. You see, we are all of different backgrounds and religions, but we all have one motto, and it is also written in the Quran. If you save one human life, it's as if you have saved all humanity. I'm Dima from Darra. This is where our peaceful revolution started. When the soldiers first came to shoot us, we gave them olive branches to tell them that all we want is peace and freedom. We didn't plan to be humanitarians, me and my friends. It just happened when the bombing started. I remember that first day when the barrel bomb started. I was walking in a narrow street when we heard the sound. Someone screamed, lie down, and people fell flat on the ground, and people started to pray. I froze. I saw the planes dropping the bombs. I saw they destroyed everything, everything, everything. But we didn't sit still and wait for help when the bombing started. We knew that the humanitarian workers from abroad wouldn't be able to come into the liberated areas. So we came forward to help in whatever way we could. My friend, Jihad, he set up the Syrian Defense Unit here in Darra. I helped him. I took 2 first aid classes so I could join the field hospital as a volunteer. My area was captured by the regime, so I would cross the front line every day to reach the hospital. It was very dangerous, but nothing could make me stop, because our people need so much help. Every day, new civic organizations are set up to help people. We don't work separately. We all work together, because we all have just one goal, and because we know that everything is interconnected. We all are interconnected. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good luck. Good luck with this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rama. And when I was told I had to go on stage after you, I knew I was in trouble anyway. So you have to listen a few minutes to my droning Norwegian English. As chair, it's my privilege and also my duty to highlight a few of the goals and aims that I think that we should have in focus during this session here. I will not give you a history lesson, but to be brief, the SAGE, the Strategic Advisory Group on Environmental Emergencies, was established by the AG, the Advisory Group on Environmental Emergencies, which is more or less what you are today. The EEF is the AG transformed. And me as chair take guidance from this forum every second year, and work and strive to highlight the issues that we together in this meeting agree upon in the next 2 years to come. Where I meet colleagues in UNEP and in OCHA, I meet the ONDAC guys, I meet INSARAG, I meet the colleagues doing civil-military coordination work, etc., etc. So we try to also combine the injects we have here with the inputs from other colleagues working in similar fields. As you know, 2015 is a significant year. It marks the launch of the post-2015 global agreements on sustainable development, disaster risk reduction, and climate change. And in 2016, as already has been mentioned several times, the World Humanitarian Summit will develop the outcomes of these processes, exploring the humanitarian needs of these needs that can be tackled in a fast-changing world. I think that Mr. Egeland really put the finger on how fast-changing it really is. My hope is that the 2015 Environmental Emergencies Forum will contribute to these global policy discussions. This year, the forum will explore the nexus of environmental risk, humanitarian crisis and climate change, identifying ways to better prepare for and respond to environmental emergencies. The outcome of the forum will be fed into the processes I mentioned earlier. I will therefore encourage you all to actively participate in the different sessions. Make your voice heard. Wendy?
Thanks. So it's now my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the joint UNEP-OCHA Environment Unit. My team has been working tirelessly to make this all happen, and you'll recognize them by the green flowers they're wearing. Please don't hesitate to approach any one of them if you have any questions or concerns. They should be able to answer them. I've told them so. I'd also like to take this opportunity to really express a special thanks to the Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection for generously hosting us in this magnificent venue, and for bringing us all here together, and for all the extra special touches that really show us how Norwegian hospitality is very generous. I'm really honored that we have many distinguished experts and speakers among us today. As Ørjan mentioned, the format is designed to really gather the best knowledge and experiences from all of you. Just going to take another moment to review what brings us all here together as a community working on the different dimensions of environmental emergencies. On the screen, you'll see the vision of the joint unit, which is for countries to be better prepared, more resilient, and able to effectively respond to environmental emergencies. What is great, just one more thing, is just a quick reminder on how we are defining environmental emergencies, and that is a sudden onset disaster or emergency which results in the release of hazardous substances or causes widespread destruction or damage to the environment, really affecting livelihoods and creating the need for a humanitarian response. Along the way, we've grown into really a community of practitioners and advocates. And I'm proud to note that many of these activities that we've accomplished together are done with your support and other partners. These activities are highlighted in the major activities book that's included in your folder. And just to review some of the highlights, as you know, we work in three main areas: preparedness, response, and environment and humanitarian action. We'll have a chance throughout the session to really go in depth. So in preparedness, just to say, one of our major goals is to have a collaborative support to preparedness actions to the most at-risk countries. What we've done is improved over the years our training and improved the flash environment assessment tool to prepare for possible chemical risks. This has been piloted in Armenia, for example. We field tested beyond response training in Mozambique, Mauritius, Central Asia, and the Caucasus regions. And we've launched, as you know, 2 years ago, the Environmental Emergency Center, and we're still improving on it, making available e-learning facilities and other material to help in training on environmental emergency preparedness. Under response, what we're trying to do is to ensure that in all major emergencies, we have the appropriate technical expertise to look at environmental issues deployed with the first responders to assess the environmental impact and to mobilize the appropriate response. So, for example, in response to the Philippines Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, we had sent an immediate environment expert who then, and in one of the islands, we found that there was an oil spill from a power barge slamming into the coast that caused so much damage to the livelihoods that the families that had to be displaced were more than were displaced by the initial impact of the typhoon itself. This year, we've actually had deployments, actually over the past 2 years, we've had deployments to Bangladesh, Serbia, Solomon Islands, in addition to the Philippines. We'll go into depth on some of those also in the sessions. There's obviously the ongoing response to Nepal, and what we'd like to do is, since we have some of you just fresh from that experience of deploying to Nepal, is tomorrow evening maybe we'll have a little facilitated session to see what we've learned from that initial response. In environment and humanitarian action, we're trying to ensure that the right environmental expertise is available to identify critical environmental factors that affect both the quality and sustainability of the response. Our focus now is developing country-specific action plans to ensure that environmental issues are integrated both in the strategy and the decision-making and the response. Last year we had deployments, last year we had a long-term, a 9-month deployment to Sudan to work with our humanitarian partners. And what we're doing now is implementing country studies in Haiti. This is a picture of Haiti, Afghanistan, and South Sudan, and we hope to have one in Nepal soon. This is really just a quick flyover of all that we're doing. As I mentioned, the details are in the book, and we'll actually go in depth in some of the sessions. And what I'd like to do actually is just kind of run through what else is going to happen today before we start our first session. So for today's program, as soon as I finish talking, Rama will lead us through a quick icebreaker exercise so you can get to know some of the people in the room. Then we'll hear about a success story in preventing a possible chemical accident in Madagascar. Unfortunately, the Minister of Interior from Madagascar was supposed to be with us today and had a last-minute empêchement. That means he didn't make it, but the representative of OCHA from Madagascar will fill in very ably. After a short break, we'll have a session that focuses on risk, how we can best avail of risk information. As you saw in Jan's keynote, there was a lot of things that will be teased out in this session. And we'll then have a second part of that panel looking at how we can ensure that risk information is used in decision making. We'll aim to finish by 4:45 to give you some time to freshen up before the Green Star Awards. There will be transport provided by the Norwegian Civil Protection again, and we'll have 2 buses that will leave at 5:15 from the hotel. Just one more complimentary information from Ørjan about tomorrow's dinner.
Thank you, Wendy. Just a short note. I know this is a lot of information for you to take in right now, but just to be clear, I mean, tomorrow I'm very happy to invite all of you to a dinner that is sponsored by our friends in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and hosted by the State Secretary of the Ministry of Justice and Private Security, Public Security. So this dinner is for free. It's a formal dinner, and I hope you will be with us to enjoy it. It's in the program. If some of you, for some reasons, are not, I repeat, are not able to attend, please notify my 2 colleagues that you can see standing up there to my left, your right. But I really hope to see you all there during this dinner. It will be a session where we can network and get to know each other better. And for those of you who have never been to Oslo before, who would like to see the city, I would advise that after the Green Star Awards today, a stroll in the city and maybe the late bus or a tube train up here later on is a much better option than trying to do this tomorrow, as the weather forecast predicts a certain heavy amount of rain. And as much as I love Oslo, I must be fair with you and say, with 22 millimeters coming our way, it's not so nice. So make the most of today if you can. Thank you.
Thanks, Rama. Over to you. Thanks, Ørjan. Over to you, Rama. You don't need this.
I have this mic. Is it on? Should I use it? Okay. So as you can see, Ørjan and Wendy, with their extraordinary teams that you'll be getting to know, have worked really hard to ensure that in addition to your very full sessions, there's every opportunity for you to strengthen relationships and build new ones. And as you all know, it's really the strength of these relationships, your ability to draw on each other in times of need, that enables you to do the work you do. So, what we would encourage you to do throughout, not the usual conference rules, which is that you'll be in different settings each time, the seating will change. Go to a new table, meet new people, and before you leave that session, ensure that you know the people who are around you. Do the same in breaks. Try to make sure that in every break you're able to meet at least a couple of people you haven't seen before. And right now, what is really important is just that we get from all of you your intentions for this session, for this forum. So what we're going to ask you to do is take these colored papers, which you can all see on your table. Just make sure you all have one or pass them around, right? And just to reflect for 1 minute, what is it that you most want to get out of this forum? What would you like to contribute? What would you like to take back home? Not a long thesis, 1 or 2 sentences. And if you could just take 1 minute to write that down, okay, as neatly as you can, please, because we will collect them, so you don't have to write your names or anything. Just write a couple of sentences on what is your main intention for this forum. Okay, there's one more thing you're going to do once you've written that. Could you go ahead and just take a minute? Yes? Any further guidance needed on that? Did you get a piece of paper on this table? Okay, so just write down on the paper very clearly. Yeah? Okay, and then what I'm going to ask you to do, once that's written so it's legible to a person who's not yourself. We'll ask you to turn around, so it'll be in small groups of 4, so 2 of you turning around to the 2 behind, so you're in groups of 4, and just pass your intention to the person on your right, okay? And you'll very quickly introduce the person whose paper you have to your group of 3. Is that clear? Okay? So literally a couple of lines. What is most important for you at this forum? Your intention, what you want to give, or what you want to get out of it. Yes? Very good. And so just turn around, and just in literally 3 minutes, so we stay on time, just do that with the group behind you. So you're in a group of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, Oriane will join you. Yeah? Just, okay, lots of intention writing. And we'll be coming around to collect these slips, if that's fine with you, because that'll help the teams to see that they're able to fulfill your intentions. Okay? Yes. Yes, not now. It's on. Okay, so just 4 of you, and yeah, stay in groups of 4 or it'll take too long. Yeah? If you're 5 or 6, you won't have time. Okay, and introduce. So pass your note to the person next to you and introduce them. Not too many intentions. Yeah? The 4 of you. Okay. Just groups of 4, so it doesn't take long. Very good. You all already know each other.
Just about my emails, yeah.
Yeah? So pass your intentions to each other. So you will introduce him, he will introduce you. You got it? Yes. Can't be so easy. Yeah. Okay. Good enough. Just, yeah, pass it to the next person. We're 3 minutes late, so we're 2:11.
We were supposed to start at 2:10, making it work.
This is the end of this one. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. So it doesn't matter if you have introducing yourselves. Where's our bell? Okay, everyone, that's fine. Don't worry if you didn't finish. It's even better if you didn't finish introducing each other, because that means you have unfinished business for the break. Okay? So, everyone, we're going to start with the next session, which is making it work. So, if you haven't finished, that means you have homework for the break time, and you can continue to introduce your intention to each other or to share it with new people if you finished your working group. Okay? It was just the first icebreaker, and we will collect your intentions now, so just keep them in your mind. Is that fine? Wendy, over to you to start the next session so we don't run behind. You're not collecting the... Okay, you don't want to collect the...
Can I write to it?
No? Okay. Okay. Everyone back. We're starting the next session. Yeah? And we'll collect
Okay, just a reminder, the next session is in French. So if you don't speak French, I hope you have an interpretation device. Monsieur. Okay, je vais vous présenter.
So I'm going to introduce the various colleagues who are sitting by my side. As I said earlier, the Home Affairs Minister of Madagascar has not been able to come to Norway. That was a last-minute problem. But in any case, his presentation will be made by somebody else who is somebody who represents OCHA and the resident representative of UNDP. He's been very involved in the process, so he knows everything about it. And to the left, Thomas Delannoy, who is Policy Officer, Humanitarian Aid and Civil Protection at the European Commission. He is building a European framework for disaster prevention. Before joining ECHO, he worked on pollution, marine pollution, and other environmental problems. Patrick Appert is Business Development and Completion Manager at Sherit International at Ambatovi site in Madagascar. He is in charge of a number of industrial activities, and he's also in charge of all environmental problems related to the site of Ambatovi.
Madagascar est un.
So Madagascar is one of the most vulnerable African countries. Indeed, cyclones, floods, and drought are rife, and a quarter of the population live in at-risk areas. Very often you have various hazards combined together. When you have a natural catastrophe affecting an industrial site, you also have not only the natural catastrophe, but also the industrial damage caused by this natural catastrophe. We call it a NATEC, a natural hazard triggered industrial technological accident. So certainly at national level, prevention measures are rather still at the beginning stages, and certainly at local level, things are not at all developed. Now, since the 1990s, Ambatovi, that is I'm awfully sorry. Well, Ambatovi, which is an industrial site, was located in Toamasina, and that is a nickel and cobalt plant. And the nickel and the cobalt are sent by pipeline to the harbor, which is 220 kilometers away. This harbor is the most important one in that area, and it is also highly populated. So, of course, the population is very much at risk of the presence of these chemicals should there be a chemical disaster. Recently, local actors realized that a number of gas leaks were affecting the population, and the population, of course, had to be hospitalized. And the National Risk Identification Office decided to have an in-depth analysis of this situation. And in 2013, the JAU sent an expert group to Madagascar. So they wanted to see what the situation was with regard to hazards and risks in that area. And they wanted also to see whether one could do something about preparedness of the population. So the team visited all those sites where dangerous materials were transported and stockpiled. In fact, safety standards are of a very high standard, but what is problematic is a disused site. For instance, a number of containers were lying about containing more than 26 metric tons of very toxic chemicals. So in the end, industrial risks were found to be much more complicated than what had first been thought. Very, very toxic materials, very close to populations, very close to the sea as well, and in a disaster and a natural disaster-prone area. So an action plan was set up with, as first priority, the neutralization of the disused industrial area. So there was a risk analysis, the planning of probable risk, and the capacity building of the population. Then a second mission by JEU took place in November 2013. And there again, cooperation with other bodies was undertaken with the French authorities in this particular instance. Oops, problem. I was going to show you a map, but unfortunately, it seems that I'm not able to do so. Well, in the risk analysis showed three sort of concentric circles where you have within an area of possible explosion, people could perhaps die within 30 minutes of an accident happening. And later on, in the second concentric circle, people could be injured within 30 minutes of this explosion, and in the third and the outer circle, people would be affected in very different ways. So a first emergency plan was set up. So people were made aware of the fact that these barrels, which contained ammonia, in fact, were going to be burnt out. And so they were prepared for that, and they were taken away from the area. Apart from these barrels, there were other barrels, very corroded, disused barrels, which could not actually be in fact, taken away from the site, and they had to be neutralized on site. So with the help of local authorities and other authorities, and a partner was found to actually dismantle the containers, which were successfully dismantled, I'm pleased to say, in the autumn of 2014. Furthermore, UNEP and OCHA decided to launch an awareness-raising exercise, for example. An evacuation exercise was organized with the local population. Let's have a look now, very, very quickly, at one of those tanks. So we now have local management, risk management units. I'm now going to ask a few questions to the people who will take the floor after me. I would like to address a question first to Rija. what were the key factors for the success of a chemical accident prevention in Madagascar? Thank you very much. We don't hear you very well, sir. Thank you, Emilia. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think that there are three main success factors. But when we're talking about industrial and chemical risks, we should not really, it's not so easy to talk about a real success, because after all, this is a new risk for us, and it's a totally new risk for the population. So we haven't really managed to fight it successfully. There are all sorts of other recurrent cyclical risks which we have to face every year. Now, the very first key to so-called success is local initiative. It started from local actors themselves, of course, coordinated by the local authorities. In 2012, for instance, they organized an industrial risk management committee. So that committee was integrated to the national and regional disaster risk reduction unit. And next to that, private companies, those private industrial companies, did in fact commit to support the activities of that local committee. And as far as Ambatovy is concerned, well, they were particularly dynamic. They also were very much involved in leading the whole process. This local initiative is very important indeed, because apart from industrial risks, you have droughts, epidemics, and cyclones, etc. But normally, initiatives are taken at national level. Something is decided nationally, and then it is duplicated at different lower levels. And this doesn't always work. But certainly when it comes to chemical and industrial dangers and risks, the initiative started right at ground level. And once that initiative was launched, and I'm now coming to the second key to success, certainly at national level, right to the highest level, that of the president, that of the prime minister, and all concerned ministries, the decentralization and home affairs ministry. At those levels, there is great willingness and commitment to support this initiative. So at national level, all necessary support was given to the local committee. And of course, capacities are by force limited. And once we've come to the end of to the limit of our capacities, we turn to the United Nations, represented in Madagascar, asking them to make available to us various experts. And it is thanks to this that we have had the contribution from the EU, from OCHA, from UNDP, and other organizations. And the United Nations have really been a major contributor to our success. We were very lucky in having somebody who actually had experienced a chemical accident somewhere else in the past, and an accident which had actually caused more than 1,000 deaths. And this experience was certainly of great help in devising ways and means of helping us in Madagascar. Of course, this is a new risk, as we said. Everybody is not equally informed about the risks posed by industrial plants. And before 2012, 2012, we really were rather reluctant to speak to one another, to communicate. A lot of information was kept more or less secret. There was a great reluctance to pass it on to others. But after 2012, communication was managed by this local committee, and from that moment onwards, transparency was the order of the day. Everything was communicated with the greatest transparency, thanks to which all stakeholders, all actors, the local population and all the other concerned bodies have become involved. So these are the three keys to success, as far as I can say. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn to Mr. Delannoy, who is the representative of the European Commission ECHO. I'm going to ask him what the European Commission has done in the field of preparation, preparedness and prevention. Is this well underway? Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you all. Indeed, the European Commission has had a fairly important role to play in this mission, side by side with the United Nations. And I think that among the key success factors of this mission, one can say that good practice has been one of them, because different organizations have come to the fore together. First of all, we've had an exploratory mission, and then we have had a more specific mission, so that we've been able to analyze things properly and assess the risk properly. And different actors, local authorities, regional authorities, national authorities have become involved, and the population as a whole and the private sector as well. So all this together shows that preparedness needs to be based on partnerships, as highlighted by this mission. And in Europe, we're working towards linking prevention, preparedness, and response. We have a civil protection mechanism which was renewed at the end of 2013, and now it is centering much more on prevention and preparedness. In preparedness, we finance a number of exercises. We train experts so that they can actually respond to disasters when such disasters take place. And we can now directly act at the request of the United Nations to prepare and to prevent. And when it comes to preparedness, we have done an awful lot of work on risk analysis. We are trying to make sure that an overall risk analysis is carried out, all risks together, and then that can lead to an emergency plan. And this certainly is now a law in Europe. We also want to make sure that there is a proper exchange of data among member states. We also want to make sure that research results are better communicated, and how scientists can actually work more closely with policy makers in the field of emergency preparedness. Could I perhaps highlight a few factors which are very important if we are to be successful? First of all, there needs to be a political will. Each actor has to know his or her role. There must be also a proper exchange of data between the various stakeholders, private and public. And also we must concentrate on imparting to the public the results of all the analyses undertaken. And I would like to highlight now a number of challenges for the future. First of all, I think that we need to change our mindset. This process of identification of risks is not, as we think, technical and scientific. It is first and foremost political. And risk identification project needs to be undertaken, because this is the way to bring together people and politicians. And also there needs to be an exchange of experience at regional level. This we do, of course, in Europe, but various regions have to be able to come together and to work together. And also risk identification is cross-sectoral. And indeed, that was highlighted in Sendai when we adopted the new risk reduction framework. When we talk about risk prevention, all sectors are involved: private, public, local authorities, national authorities, scientists, but also new sectors: health, education, culture, those who are involved in population displacement of peoples also. So we need to be able to use to good effect the experience of the private sector to carry out risk analysis. We should cooperate much better with them. We should perhaps have a public-private partnership, develop such a partnership in order together to develop an integrated prevention policy. Now, we've had the adoption of the Sendai framework. It needs to be implemented. We need to make sure that when we meet for the World Humanitarian Summit, we can talk about vulnerabilities and partnerships as key ingredients, key questions that need to be well prepared and starting here. So this collaboration between the public and private sectors, Mr. Appert, was that very much to the fore in Arbatavie? Yes, thank you, Wendy. To answer your question, I would like to come back to this project. In 30 years ago, a fertilizer plant was set up in the east of the country. Unfortunately, that plant really was unsuccessful, and year by year, all the various parts and contents of this plant were lost or. And now we have this ammonia plant. Well, ammonia is in fact in liquid form. We can ammonia actually burns. It does explode, like butane, like propane, like liquefied gas. But ammonia is also toxic. Even if it doesn't catch fire, a leak of ammonia can have fatal consequences, and just a tiny concentration in the atmosphere can actually cause deaths. So we had 2 tanks full of liquid ammonia, and this was really something which was very, very much like a possible Bhopal. It could simply lead to thousands of deaths. So we are very important economically in this area, and therefore we have social responsibility, and we have a social fund, for instance, which manages a number of projects, including the destruction of these disused tanks. Well, we use ammonia in our process, and therefore we were able to help in the neutralization of these tanks. Well, it was very important that roles and responsibilities were identified. There were discussions at various levels. As I was preparing today's meeting, I realized that we had 35 exchanges of mails with the presidency, with ministries, with local and regional authorities, to make quite sure that everyone knew what their role was. So a response plan was also set up. The French embassy helped, the United Nations helped. So who does what. This needs to be well highlighted and identified before acting. And also, you had to make sure that the right contractor was used to neutralize these tanks. As you could see, rust was holding all the pieces together, making it more or less leak-proof. So we had to find the right contractor to actually take care of these tanks. So we turned to a South African subcontractor who were able to make quite sure that things were made absolutely foolproof, and that there was also welding operations. So they had to actually weld corroded metal, which was certainly not easy to do. So we had to find the real people who were able to actually make sure that these tanks were safe to handle. And of course, after that, we had to make quite sure that transparency was the order of the day, that the methodology was understood and approved by all concerned. Certainly, it was very difficult for me to make my own people take them on board with us, but everyone, in fact, took part, maintenance, handling, etc. People told us, "Oh, well, you know, this is impossible. You're certainly going to cause a leak, and we don't really want to take part in that sort of thing." And but then they came on board, and then local authorities and all the various bodies took part. Industrialists were also involved. We had a fantastic teamwork altogether, because together, private and public actors were involved, and everyone actually worked perfectly well hand in hand, and this is why we managed to be successful. Could we have a look at this risk analysis map? Maybe we can listen to one or two questions. If you would like to react to what you have heard, you may wish to ask a question to the speakers you've heard. Well, if you don't wish to take the floor right now, tomorrow evening we're going to see a video of the whole process, and you're going to be able to see exactly how it all happened. And we do hope that this is going to be a good example for the whole of Madagascar. Do you have any question that you would wish to ask right now?
Merci. Pour mieux poser ma question.
Yes, I would like to ask a question in English, if you don't mind.
Petite question, mais je vais poser une seule question.
I had two questions, but I would like to ask only one for the time being.
Just want to understand, how is it that with the technological disasters, in case of the chemical disaster you were just talking of, you use the bottom-top approach, but with other disasters like floods, like drought, you are using the top-bottom approach. Why can't you marry the two so that you receive the same success that you did with the bottom-top approach?
Yeah, as I said earlier, we do have cyclical recurrent risks such as drought, cyclones, etc. Madagascar is an underdeveloped country, and decentralization is not really successful. So whenever there is an emergency, we start reacting at national level, and then we try to apply what's been decided at national level at different sub-levels. When it comes to these recurrent risks, well, this is the way we've worked for years and years and years. And we've never had a decentralization when it comes to those natural hazards. And as I said, it doesn't really necessarily work. But when it comes to chemical risks, well, we certainly learned quite a lot, not only about chemical risks, but about a possible approach to other risks. It's only 2 or 3 years since we started working on industrial chemical risks with this bottom-up approach, and it really did work. So this is something totally new for us, but it should be possible to duplicate it when it comes to other major risks and hazards in Madagascar.
Thank you. Unfortunately, our time is up for this panel. I want to thank Monsieur Lenoir, Monsieur Appert, and Rija. They will be with us throughout the forum, so if you have questions, please do approach them and make those contacts. As I mentioned, we will also be able to see the film on Madagascar, and not the animated one, tomorrow night, but on Avatovi. What's happening now is we have a coffee break until 3:15. We'll be able to look more closely about risk information, local, regional, and national risk information, what's available, and how to use it. How do we ensure that decision makers use it when we come back at 3:15? And again, unfortunately, because of a travel hiccup, Nick Harvey isn't with us, but the session will be moderated by Andy Toe from OCHA. So please, let's be prompt and back in the room at 3:15 for the session on risk. Thank you so much. See you soon. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the panel on managing risk and reducing vulnerabilities. And as I mentioned before, we have a pinch hitter moderator. Now it's going to be Andy Toe, who is our resident risk expert within OCHA. He works in the Information Services branch. He is the project manager for the Index for Risk Management, which is a collaborative project with the Interagency Standing Committee on Preparedness and Resilience and the European Commission and OCHA. And I'm sure that during the panel he'll be explaining a little bit more about the Index for Risk Management. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andy to introduce the panel.
Thanks. Thank you, Wendy. Okay, welcome everybody to the session on managing risks and reducing vulnerability. This is our chance now to go into a little bit more detail on some of these topics we've heard Jan and others describe so eloquently. As Wendy said, my name is Andy Thau, I work for OCHA. I was going to be on the panel, now I'm moderating. Unfortunately, Nick Harvey, who was going to be our moderator, is not able to make it, but I will do my best. So this session will last until 4:45 to allow you time to get ready for your trip to Oslo. And really what we're going to do is try and address this concept of risk and preparedness for disasters, humanitarian emergencies, and environmental emergencies. And specifically, what we're going to do is look at this concept of understanding risks. So firstly, how do we improve that kind of information that tells us about the risk of crises? And secondly, how do we make sure we actually use that information to make some decisions that will help save lives, livelihoods, and also protect the environment? So we have a very diverse and distinguished panel here to help us do that. Pascal Peduzzi from the Global Resource Information Database in UNEP. Birgitta Liljedahl from the Swedish Defense Research Agency. Alexandra Ruth from the German Red Cross. Huma Kleeman from the OECD. Larry Maramis from ASEAN. And Verena Treber from Alliance Climate Solutions. So welcome to you all. This is how we're going to organize ourselves. So we're going to firstly from from Pascal, Birgitta, and Verena, very broadly focused on this idea of improving risk information. And this is quite, the line between these two parts is quite blurry, but they will go first. Then we'll have some time for questions, reflections, comments on those presentations. Then we will have another 3 short presentations from Alexander, Larry, and Hugh, who will focus a little bit more on the decision-making part of this problem. And after that, you'll be able to ask them questions, and we'll also try and have some time for discussion among the whole panel there. So before we get started on that, I'll try and do my little bit where I step in for what Nick would have said when he's here, if he had been here, and just to talk a little bit about some of the outcomes we hope to get from this session. So, as I said, we want to talk about risk information, and obviously this is a very important topic, and I think listening to Jan Egeland's presentation, we all saw all of those new drivers of risk, and I think understanding those is a critical piece of this. But specifically why we wanted to talk about this in this forum is because, as you've heard of the upcoming World Humanitarian Summit, which will take place in Istanbul in 2016. And we hope through this session that we can provide some inputs and recommendations into that process. So just as a means of introduction for a couple of minutes, I'd just like to give you a little bit more background on this summit and what it means. As you all know, the number of people who are being affected by humanitarian crises, including environmental emergencies, has gone up quite steeply recently, doubled over the last decade, in fact. And as you all also know, these drivers like climate change, environmental degradation play a part in this. And at the same time, the way that we actually work in response to humanitarian emergencies is also changing. And we have these persistent challenges like insufficient finance to actually respond to those. So the World Humanitarian Summit is an opportunity to propose a new agenda for humanitarian action that takes account of all of those changes in both the drivers of crisis and how we respond. So one of the main themes that was identified in the early stages of the consultations for this summit was around managing risk. And the kind of core of that theme is really, how can we help communities to be more resilient in the face of these changing risks. So that includes both new things that maybe we haven't thought about, but also these persistent, recurring, and protracted shocks. So there's various ideas as part of that summit process, and some of you may be involved in that, on how we do this, including kind of themes like preparing more locally for these kind of risks, and also how the sort of humanitarian development communities work more closely together. But the theme that we're going to talk about today, understanding risk, really underpins all of those things. So that's why it's so important. So that includes things like being able to predict crises better, bringing in expertise from outside the humanitarian sector, and also how we might change the way we respond and use some of these risk-based ideas like insurance, which of course also relies on risk information. So that is kind of where the summit process is right now. I hope we'll hear your experiences, we'll hear the ideas from the panel, and we'll have some kind of outcomes that we can feed back into that process. So in particular, I hope maybe we can talk a little bit about environmental risk and how that feeds in. So that's all I wanted to say on the World Humanitarian Summit. Please be active in listening to the speakers. Please provide your own experiences and comments, and ask lots of questions, and we'll have a good session. So let me introduce our first speaker, who is Pascal Peduzzi from UNEP, and he's going to talk well, he can tell us himself, but about environmental risk information and the way that we're improving it. Thank you, Pascal. So here's
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Bonjour, je suis heureux d'avoir eu l'occasion de vous présenter un sujet qui est vraiment au cœur même de mes activités.
Everybody's saying, and it's very common to say that it's better to invest in prevention than trying to try to mitigate the impact afterward. Yes, that's true, but it's very easy to say. And there's a big legacy about that we have to deal with, a huge heritage of bad practices and accumulation of infrastructures that we have to deal with. And it's not that easy to actually deal with all this legacy. But it's true, this is the aim, is to go through more preventing risk rather than having to restore better things afterward. I've been working since 2000 on a series of reports. About 14 reports of them have been at the global level in collaboration with other UN agencies like UNDP or UNICR. And every time we've been trying to say, you have to invest in prevention, you have to reduce vulnerabilities, you have to invest in ecosystem-based adaptation process. And it's getting there. We make some progress, but we are still far from the aim that we want to achieve. One way to disseminate data and information, just a bit of advertising here for a platform called Preview, where we put all the layers of global data related to risk, on hazard, vulnerabilities, and exposure and risk, so you can access data and download and visualize, interrogate risk. So this is one of our platform for where you can access this information about risk, and then you can connect this information with other kind of data to look at ecosystems or economics. But today I wanted to talk about the idea we have about risk. We see most of the time people think about disasters as being very sudden events. And yes, the hazard is sudden, like the tropical cyclones, or tsunami, forest fires, explosions, and so on. This is very sudden hazard. But the risk itself is actually building like a house of cards, that patiently, very slowly, we are inflating a bubble of risk, and we're creating that. And this card castle is going to collapse at one stage. We don't know when, but it will. So it's actually a long process that it's based on it's a slow continuous process resulting from inappropriate or lack of choices. So we do bad choices, we invest in wrong places or in wrong technologies, and then at one stage there's a hazard that just triggered that and the entire things explode or collapse. So we have to get away from this idea that it's a very quick process. It's actually a very slow, sometimes take decades to go. So in order to very well understand this risk, we've seen this multiple times. It's intersection between the hazard itself, the vulnerability, the exposure that creates the risk. And on top of that, we have changes on climate and environment, decline of ecosystem due to anthropogenic climate change and anthropogenic changes on ecosystems. And on the other hand, we have developments that on one hand can reduce the risk, on the other hand it can create new risk. So with greenhouse gases, deforestation, technological hazards that we are inducing, we can increase the risk. On top of that, we have also the ecosystems that are protecting us. And we take that for granted, but we are destroying mangroves, we're destroying forests on slopes, we are creating more exposure to hazard by destroying those ecosystems or by removing sand on beach and so on. And this is something that really needs to be taken into consideration for achieving sustainable development, that we take those ecosystems, we protect them, because in return they are protecting us. One of the triggers that we have more risk is because we have population increasing. If we take population 1975, 4.1 billion, and now we are more than 7, maybe close to 8 billion very soon, and heading toward 9.5 or 10 billions in 2050. So with more people, we have more exposure, we have more urbanization. Actually, more than 50% of the world is now urban, which is not necessarily a bad thing. When it starts to be a bit more problematic is 1/3 of them live in slums, and so with very poor infrastructures. Triggers of environmental disaster risk, we have new technologies because we are creating new industries with new substances. So there are new chemical substances that are being released, used. We don't necessarily know how harmful they are. In fact, there is a report from the EU that 99% of the investment in new technologies and chemicals and so on was done against 1% on verifying the impact of this development. So we can't cope with our development because there is no equality between what we can monitor and what we are actually developing. So a large amount of new substances are being developed. Now it kills, we have to look at those long-term pollution that kills millions of people in terms of air quality. We have lots of issue in dealing with these this very extensive risk. Now, NACTEC hazards, we think about Fukushima is a very large one example where we have to deal with this natural hazard that then degenerate into technological hazards. Climate change will make more exacerbating those patterns of hazard, creating new one. And ecosystem decline as well, deforestation and landslide, urbanization, and heat waves, destruction of marine coastal ecosystems, and storm surge, deforestation and drought, forest fires, another one. And last one is this difference, and that's been explained in GRA, the difference between intensive and extensive risk. If we think about this very low frequency but very intense like nuclear accident, explosion and so on, they've got very high impact and that's what tends to get the headlines. But on the other hand, we have very extensive risk where we have very high frequency over a large area, but they, in a cumulative way, they may be a very large impact as well. So we also have to deal with these emergencies. And when we talk about environmental emergency, we talk most of the time on this very low frequency, high impact. But in fact, we have to keep in mind that there's lots of very high emergencies that are continuously happening. And we have to deal with that, and government have to deal with that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pascal. So please keep your questions until after we've had these first three presentations, and I'll hand over to Birgitta.
So thank you first so much for having us here. It's really, really great pleasure and honor. And this one works like how? Is my presentation on? No. This is yours. No. That's the other one. Sorry. Yeah, I can start meanwhile. We work with the environmental and health concerns at the Swedish Defence Research Agencies in conflict and disaster areas, meaning most conflict/post-conflict regions. And our concern is that, yeah, wonderful, thank you. Perfect. Almost. Our concern is that, or our understanding is that environmental and health issues are indeed conflict drivers at occasions. Maybe not by themselves, but as a part of a conflict security nexus. And when you add disaster upon this, it makes it even more important. So having a conflict area where you also have environmental or industrial disaster problems, it's a real challenge, almost as difficult as IT. So that's good for us to experience, that's good for me. So one thing that we work with most of the time is environmental intelligence. And what does that mean? That means we look upon all kinds of things, the things that you just saw great presented from UNEP, and climate change, flooding, etc., etc. And also new events, like what does it mean if you have an industrial disaster from a tsunami, or if you have an industrial, multiple maybe, disaster from a cyber attack. Are we looking at all these things about industrial risks from all the angles that we need to? Or is it like this that the IT things built into the industry might be the new weak link that you so excellently presented in your card house? We're building in IT systems in the industrial world that might be weak links to new disasters. This is something that we think about. So these are some of the countries we've been working in and working on for the last decade. And the key environmental concerns that we have experienced being water-related, natural resources-related, or indeed culture-related, that people go in and destroy cultural heritage without knowing you do it. Let's see. And the approach we then have is the life cycle of a deployment. So you go in maybe only for 6 months or 3 weeks or 1 week, what have you, but you have the planning stage, you do what you're there to do, and then you learn something from it, inshallah. And in the planning stage, our experience now after doing this for quite a while is that, okay, we have a pretty good idea about the environmental vulnerability in whatever area we want to deploy to. But this information is tricky to share with the people who make the decisions in time. So maybe you have, before a deployment, you have like a presentation for 5 minutes for the commander, and in this you have 1 slide or maximum 1 minute to talk about the environment. So how do you make the environmental issues on the agenda? How do you make it impact the budget, the resources that you send out? This is what we focus on. And we have learned that it can be done. You just need to do it using these great maps that you showed just recently, and focus on the main goal of the mission itself. One thing that we really lack, I'm going to talk about failures because I think that's a good thing to talk about. What we really lack is to see the accumulated footprint on all of us deploying to Nepal or some other place. What happens when all of us come there and try to do a really good thing? We're going to do some good things, thank you, and we're going to maybe create some problems also, because we're not coordinated. So what we would like to see is kind of this joint environmental impact assessment before we all deploy. That would be a really great tool out there. So anyone going to Nepal or where have you can look at this joint environmental impact assessment saying, okay, this is vulnerable, this we need to think about. I think that's really important. And when is it that we fail our experience? When we lack trust. When we don't need it, know each other so well that we really share. And maybe sometimes back off from the mission because someone else can do it better. So trust, a joint environmental impact assessment, that would be super good. Thank you. Oh yes, the last one. We're going to have a session on water issues, joint water issues. So anyone interested, just contact us. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Birgitta. I'm sorry about the technical hitches. Is there something we can do about that strange noise? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we'll hand over to Verena. Maybe let's just, yes, okay. So there you go. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm from the insurance sector, Allianz Global Insurance Company, and I called my presentation the Risk Guru's Data Challenge. Why the Risk Guru? Actually, some weeks ago, Christiana Figueres from UNFCCC has been at Allianz, and she addressed a room full of high-ranking executives by saying, "You are the risk gurus of society." Since then, I have been asking myself, is that really true or not? And actually being here today, I know that we are not the risk gurus of society, or at least not the only ones. And having heard the other people speaking about risk, there is much we can learn. But still, I think it is worth to have a closer look at the insurance sector also in this setup here. So I brought with me 3 numbers, because private sector always looks at numbers. We all know that. The first figure is the direct economic losses from natural catastrophes in 2014. The second figure is the uninsured losses. And the third figure, just for comparison, is the official development aid from OECD countries in the same year. So when you compare the first 2 numbers, you see that almost 2/3 of economic losses from natural disasters is not insured. So is the insurance sector doing a bad job, or what is the problem? One of the problems is actually risk data, and we are here now on this panel to talk about risk data. And I liked when Jan, earlier today, he said, we looked at the map of meteorological information, and he said that the difference in information we have about natural disaster, meteorological information, that is also a kind of climate injustice. So that's really also what the insurance sector is struggling with when we look at insuring in some regions where the insurance cover is not very high at the moment. So what are we doing about that? I brought you 2 small projects just to give you an idea. The first one is that in 2010 Allianz realized that when we want to insure metropolitan areas in India, we have to know about the flood risks, for example. And there was just no proper model for that, no model with which an insurance company could work. So we partnered with a modeling agency and developed first ever flood maps for insurance companies in India. Unfortunately, there has not been really a follow-up together with, for example, policymakers on working on that information and increasing preparedness, or together with the humanitarian community, for example. But some maps exist now. The second project I brought to you as an example is also playing in Asia. It's called RISE. It's in joint partnership with the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines and a couple of other partners like SARMAP. And the idea is to have real-time monitoring of rice crop growth, and there is a special satellite used for that. The satellite is called Sentinel-1A. It's from the European Space Agency, and it can look through a thick layer of clouds, which is very important in monsoon periods. And we are interested in that technology because it will tell us lots about risks for farmers, and it will give us the chance in maybe a couple of years to really develop insurance products which will help the people in these 7 countries. But also one of the targets of the project is also engagement with policymakers on prevention, on better regulation. So these were just 2 little projects. But I think there is much untapped potential. So I brought you 4 wisdoms from some guru, whoever it is, which I think we should all keep in mind if we want to have more cooperation, maybe between the insurance sector and the humanitarian sector. The first thing is that really data is crucial, and everything you here in the room are doing today to get better data will help in the future to maybe also develop some kinds of products or some kinds of new mechanisms, really innovative mechanisms to help people deal better with their risks. So historic data is very important for insurance companies. So in 5 or 10 years, the work you are doing today will also serve us. We think we have to understand each other better. There is a start. We are talking to each other, but yeah, I'm thankful for that invitation, that I can be here today, so that we understand each other better. The third point is, you know that sustainability, long-term view is very important for all projects you do. We also have to learn that. For example, when we partner with some public entity and we talk, for example, about subsidies, subsidized schemes, we have to think about what's happening in 5 years or 10 years. When we implement an idea now, what will happen to it in 5 or 10 years? And last but not least, we have to keep an eye on the impact, and you are better in assessing social impact. We might be good in assessing business impact, looking at the figures, but you are better, for example, when we talk about microinsurance at the end, so we have the risk data and then we can have some products like microinsurance. You are the ones who can help the insurance sector to assess if the products are really making things better for the community. And I hope for some more cooperation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Verena. So, I mean, we have, I'm sure, a lot of risk gurus in this room. So let's open it up. I know it's the first time you got to all talk. So is there any questions on these first three presentations that we've had, or comments you'd like to make? Yes, sir? I'm afraid you... Okay, that's not going to be... Great. Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. I am Vishnu Preti from Nepal. I have one question to Pascal and one to Verena. Pascal, you were highlighting so many interesting things, and you have such a big experience since 2005-06 on the risk assessment. But one element which we are very frequently observing is the lack of integration of the local knowledge, especially the socio-psychological knowledge, the cultural knowledge, how you want to integrate that. And for the Verena, just a few weeks back, we were very highly hit by the earthquake, and then people went to the insurance company, and then the common response from the insurance company was that bring the evidences of the earthquake, and then they were not able to get, and then this became a very big issue. What I am referring to is the very complicated administrative cumbersome procedure of the insurance company, which is not really helping to the people. So your wisdom guru, how it can help to simplify this procedure? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if let's take a few, and I will give you guys a chance to have a think. Anyone else has a question they'd like to ask? Okay. Well, Pascal, do you want to give us your thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you for your question. It's a very good one. I think local knowledge is very specialized, and we are using it when we do local studies. A lot of the report I've been showing was on global studies, but when we do local studies, like I've done in several places, in Peru, in Jamaica, recently in Tunisia, then we do two parallel processes that feed each other. So one process is this very data extensive GIS, remote sensing, modeling and everything. And in parallel of that, we do national up to local consultations of experts up to the community level, where we get the stories. Because, for example, we're doing a study in Jamaica on beach erosions, and we could see with satellites that we've been losing a lot of those beaches. But the why, you can't get that from the satellite. So the why, you have to do consultation at the local level, at the national level, to get that and get their recommendations. And the good thing is about it is when you put those two processes together, you have solid science back up with local observations and history. You put that together, you merge that in a report, and being a UN, you can, from the external point of view, you can take the report back on the table of the ministry, which local people at the community level may not be able to do that. So I think those two processes are very important. Now, the other side of that, we're talking about technological hazards. A lot of those things are new, and you don't have any indigenous knowledge or local knowledge on these new things, because we are dealing with very new technological hazard that nobody has dealt with it, and that's where we have to be very cautious about it when we go with extractive industries, and we go deeper, or in the Antarctic or Arctic region for drilling oil, or where we're doing chemicals release that we've never tested before. There we are entering the unknown, where even traditional knowledge have never been confronted with that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that's always a challenge. Bureaucracy after a disaster has hit, it's even in Germany, the last big floods we saw, it is a challenge which paper to get first, when you get your payout. But in general, I think, especially after a large disaster, insurance companies will try to pay very fast, but every disaster is also an opportunity to learn for the next one. Earthquakes, there is not so much opportunity for innovation to make that process afterwards faster, but as I've shown, for example, with the WISE project, the insurance products which are supposed to be developed from that is index-based insurance products. So that you don't have the farmer to come to the insurance company and say, I have lost all my crops, but that you can look at the weather data, what the radar has told you or what the weather station has told you, and that you can, then the insurance company can say, so I think you have lost all your crops, I pay you. So that is what is been done in lots of developing countries at the moment, especially in the agricultural sector. There are still challenges and problems with that, but that's how you try to get around that problem of every little policy coming to the insurance company and getting paid. And then also there is even more innovative approaches thought of at the moment, that when you have forecasts of disasters, that you can then already pay out to the insurance holder, so that the insurance holder can use that money for better prepare him or herself for the disaster. So there are thoughts about this problem, but certainly bureaucracy is, wherever you look after a disaster, it stays a challenge. And so I just hope that friends or family members you are knowing have made a better experience with insurance companies. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Thanks, Verena, and thank you, sir. I mean, I think there's also a point there that in the case of a major disaster like what's just happened in Nepal, maybe there is a case for fast tracking or some kind of way to cut some of that bureaucracy out. But I think the point that you made about the local knowledge, it's also a two-way thing. So maybe that's something that we can talk about also. Not only how do we include that local knowledge, but how do we make sure that those local people have access to all the globally, regionally, nationally generated information that could help them. Okay, let's have another question from this gent here. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Razi Latif. I'm a climate and environment advisor for the UK's Department for International Development. I've got a question for Verena and for Birgitte. Thank you very much for your presentations. The question that I had for Birgitte was essentially around what you said about influencing the commander, who, you know, you've got a very limited time to say something about the environment. How do you do it? I mean, that's a challenge for all of us. We're trying to influence people who are not environmentalists. So could you give us a bit more kind of information on that, or maybe an example of where that's worked very successfully? And for Verena, I was very interested to see on your last slide that you had something on understanding the private sector better and the humanitarians obviously coming together. You've got lots of humanitarians in this room today. So what messages would you give them to enable them to better understand the private sector?
Thank you. Birgitte, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. Yeah, we've been working with this for the last 20 years, and so it's been a long road. But basically, what 5 years ago, if I went into the commander and talked about environment, you were just, thrown out of the room. Today, no. And what we have done and what works is to, first of all, to use their decision system. We don't invent new tools, we do that also, but we take our information and put it in a format that is kind of exactly the way that they take in other kinds of information. Even if it looks really bad to us, we use it because it's the language they speak. And they like maps, so basically we put everything in a map. Because in GIS, the map, and then so we spend actually a lot of time trying to figure out how do we present this thing in one map that tells the story in just a few seconds. And it wasn't a coincidence that it was drawings, I don't know if you notice, around what we have learned, because since we deal with people from many different nations, you have this language barrier, and Swedish English is not really convincing. So basically, we spend a lot of time working also with, advertising people, to be honest. And that's paid off. That's really good. Because they know how to sell whatever to whomever. So we just try to use that. And the other thing is that we really spend a lot of time thinking about what is their mission. And for the commander, the mission is security. It's not development or something in the long run, but their mission is security. So we spend a lot of effort thinking, is this environmental concern really a security thing? Is it linked in an indirect way or something? And if it isn't, we won't highlight it. But there is, to our experience, always 1, 2, or 3 things that are. And we're going to show this one, and we're going to explain why there is a security link. I don't know if that answers your question, but... And the example could be Chad, sorry. We were deploying to Chad, and there was this discussion about water, lack of water, and they wanted to use traditional water flushing toilets, but in the end they didn't. So it became actually a showstopper for the whole mission. If they couldn't solve the water problem, Sweden wouldn't deploy at all. So it's on that level. That's a practical example. Thanks.
Thanks, Brigitte. And I think highlights a key point as well, how we make that communication to the decision maker. You can have all the information in the world if the person is not interested in taking it in or is not able to take it in because of the way you've presented it, you ultimately won't make a difference.
Thank you for the question. I think my 2 points to answer that question have to do with time. Firstly is that you have to understand the time frames in which the private sector thinks. It's sometimes really, really quick, and we have seen in cooperation with governments, for example, to develop sovereign risk management solutions for governments, that decision processes can be really, really slow. And I think that is the first idea you have to understand why then sometimes the private sector gets a bit nervous, because on the industrial broker market, for example, there is just 24 hours sometimes and you make a big deal, which is not comparable to a government or insuring a country. But that is just the first thing we both have to understand and be more flexible with each other, I think, for the time horizon. And the second one is, I think, the private sector is interested in cooperations, innovative projects, but also wants to see what the long-term perspective is. And I think that is how you can, or yeah, how companies can sometimes be catched or be caught by showing them a long-term, maybe then profitable perspective.
Okay, thank you. Sir, I'm just going to move on to the next panelist. We will have some more time after that to have some more questions and discussion, so I will come to you first when we do that. So Alexandra, please, welcome, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. I think you can hear.
How do
I think you can use this one.
Hello to everybody. Thanks for having invited me. It's a great chance to be here with all of you today. I'm coordinating an action plan launched by the Federal Foreign Office, and it's an action plan to adapt humanitarian aid to climate change. And this action plan is coordinated by German Red Cross. Let me first tell you a little bit about the German government and the wish to create a new anticipatory humanitarian system, and then come and more into detail explain you what this action plan covers. So, as we heard today in several presentations, we all know the number of people in need is increasing. Climate change is recognized as a major driver for increasing needs. And for example, the number of natural disasters in the last 20 years has almost doubled. What does that mean? What is the reality, today's reality of humanitarian assistance about? We face a reality of stagnating funds, and here the German government noticed that we need definitively a higher efficiency, and that's why in Germany it's part of the coalition agreement of the current government that disaster prevention, early warning systems, preparedness and reduction of disaster risks are extremely important. In June 2014, the German government carried out a forum on global issues under the name Climate Change, a Challenge for Humanitarian Assistance. The main outcome, where different international actors discussed, the main outcome was that we all need to work more on innovative approaches. And here the Federal Foreign Office committed to work on a paradigm shift in preparedness and to create this anticipatory humanitarian system. So what do we mean by that? First, in the humanitarian world, we have traditional disaster risk reduction with, you all know, in integrated programming, with short and medium-term funding, and a non-specific risk reduction, which we do not relate to extreme weather forecasts. And then we have down acute disaster relief, like we all know, Philippines, Haiyan, Nepal, right now, the earthquake, where we have ad hoc funding for disaster relief after disaster. So what Germany noticed is that we could much better use existing forecasts and scientific projections to work on an improved preparedness for response system. Well, here we see the traditional humanitarian assistance as it works, we all know. So let me now explain a little bit more in detail what the Federal Foreign Office Action Plan wants and who is part of this action plan. So the funding is coming from the Federal Foreign Office. German Red Cross is coordinating the plan. The main important partners are UN OCHA, especially for the policy level and the advocacy work. Then there is WFP in with own pilot countries. The IFRC in Geneva, or I mean worldwide, is one of the important partners, especially since we are carrying out a dialogue platform 2 times per year in Geneva. Welthungerhilfe, one big German NGO, is a partner when it comes to climate risk analysis. And the scientific support is provided by the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center in The Hague. So now, I only have 1 minute left. Forecast-based financing means that first, the main challenge is that we need decisions on thresholds. So meaning to analyze historical data, define where we put a threshold, and then decide on its kind of probabilistic models. So decide on when we want to act and how do we want to act and what does it mean to act in vain. So the most important thing is, since all kind of organizations see this risk, what it means to act in vain is to put in place standard operating procedures where we all know that if this trigger is reached, then we implement this kind of actions. To shortly go through the right side, what we are doing, we have 7 pilot countries together with WFP and German Red Cross. It's the Philippines, Bangladesh, Peru, Mozambique, Haiti, Dominican Republic. We develop a forecast-based financing methodology, and we work on a funding mechanism. And the most challenging point is, the next one is that we need an improved cooperation with scientists. And therefore, we will have the dialogue platform in Geneva. Yeah, creativity is thinking up new things, innovation is doing new things. We are trying to do it at the moment, and we hope that we can, within the next 2 years, use the chance to inform on our results. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Verena. So, yes, Hugh McLeeman from OECD. We heard the national perspective. Now, you're an intergovernmental, no, perhaps. This one seems to be more reliable.
Okay. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. We've heard a little bit this afternoon about some of the challenges of translating risk information into actual action. And what I'm going to talk about briefly is some of the efforts that we've been making in supporting our members, OECD, DAC members, bilateral donors, to translate risk and resilience into policy and programs. What I would say is that there's a huge amount of support amongst our membership to do this. There's a lot of recognition that to be able to translate risk and resilience into action, it helps to protect those development investments, but it also ensures that the increasing humanitarian challenges we're facing, that we have a system that's fit for purpose and can actually respond to some of those increasing threats that we're seeing. But what we've also found is that it's very, very difficult to move from this concept of resilience, which has received a lot of support, into something that actually makes a difference on the ground, that makes a difference to people's lives. So what we've been working on is something that we call the resilience systems analysis. And I'll just talk through that briefly. So the resilience system analysis is a 5-step approach that aims to produce a really practical, actionable roadmap to address risk and resilience. It starts by identifying and building up a common understanding of a wide range of risks and hazards in multi-hazard environments. And it builds on a lot of the increasingly sophisticated and accessible sort of tools that we have. And it's a shame that Andy's not talking, because something like Inform is really useful to this analysis. and I'd encourage you to pin him down at some point in the couple of days and get him to speak to you about it directly. It then maybe takes a different approach to some of the other tools that are there, and it uses a livelihoods framework to look at how these risks impact upon people's assets in the system. So it looks at human assets, political assets, economic assets, natural assets, environmental assets, social assets, and how these assets actually respond to these risks and hazards, and how they can absorb or adapt or transform in the face of these risks. It then does a stakeholder analysis, because we need to understand, what are the power dynamics in the system? What is helping or hindering people actually make best use of these assets to withstand these threats and these risks? And then we look at what are the existing capacities and what gaps are there in the system. And this is where we really get to some practical outcomes. And this is where we look at the gaps and we agree a roadmap to go forward to actually strengthen people's resilience. So to date, we have piloted this in DRC, in Lebanon and in Somalia, looking at the resilience of different target groups in these contexts, working with a range of partners, with our own members, with UN agencies, with some NGOs. And we're also currently looking at our members' systems and policies themselves to look at how we integrate this resilience systems approach into their policies and systems, not just at a country level, but also at a headquarters level. And what we've found, what's been really important in some of these analyses, has been a strong sense of ownership from whoever's leading the analysis. You'll see from here, we don't actually lead it. It's been led by other agencies. And also ensuring that we bring together different groups of people. So the analysis brings together experts in risk. It brings together experts in the system, so in the system or society in which we're doing the analysis. But also, most importantly, decision makers. And what I mean by that is people in government, people in UN agencies who are actually responsible for designing and implementing the programs. The analysis provides a whole set of resources, if you like. And I've just sort of put some of them up here. Things like risk profiles, capital risk databases, stress and shock maps, risk landscapes per vulnerable group. But what's most important is this resilience roadmap that is produced at the end of it. But what some of these tools do, they also let us to understand some of the changes over time in the relative strength or weakness of assets in the system. And that also helps us to support people to adjust their programs as the situation changes. I've got a minute, so I'll pick up the pace. So some of the outcomes, just very briefly, it's thrown up some innovations where we've done it. I mean, in DRC, what we discovered is that the focus on displaced communities was actually undermining social capital. And as a result of the analysis, the UN looked at their programming and put much more emphasis on host families and supporting the assets of host families. And similarly in Lebanon and Somalia, there have been some interesting outcomes. But also we've seen concrete steps taken to implement those. In Somalia, for instance, the outcomes from the resilience systems analysis is being used by the government there to strengthen the peace and state building goals in the New Deal, and also to develop a national resilience plan. So what have we learned? Just a couple of key points, I guess. I mean, you'll hear a lot today about risk information, and risk information is absolutely vital. However, it needs to go beyond that. It's not good enough just to understand risk. We need to strengthen resilience on the basis of that. So we need to find ways to make this practical and actionable. What we found is that to do this, we think that we should be focusing on the strength and weakness of assets rather than the hazards and risks themselves, because it's those assets that help people withstand the risks. Thirdly, it's very important from the pilots that we've done to look at different layers of society. So looking at, what are the assets that are held at the household level, what's held at the community level, what's held at the national level, and what's the interrelation between those levels in a system or in a society. It's important that we focus on not just catastrophic risks, but also extensive risk, and also the stresses that are built into a society that actually weaken people's ability to cope with a range of threats and hazards. We've also found that this analysis has been a very good way to integrate different sectors. So it's a useful way to bring together humanitarian community, development community, climate change and peace building. And it's also forward-looking. So there's been, from government themselves, particularly in fragile contexts, there's been a great deal of enthusiasm for a forward-looking approach rather than looking backwards at some of the drivers of fragility. So that's, hopefully there are some questions, and I'll hand back to Andy.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks. I think that's a great example of translating this information into action through this kind of tool. Okay, our last speaker is Larry Maramis from ASEAN. Larry, welcome.
Thank you, Andy, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I'm from ASEAN, and what I'll do in the next 5 minutes, probably less because I don't want to be going too much over time, is that I'll be giving more of an ASEAN perspective in our own experience on risk, especially how risk-informed decision-making has transformed us, and especially in terms of climate change and disaster management. We'll also be focusing especially on the key principles and the practices for incorporating risks information into our decision-making. Now, ASEAN really is a relatively new organization, created in '67. That's actually about almost 50 years. Yeah? But in terms of its own charter and constitution, this really was only started in 2007. And that charter sets out a regionalist philosophy, what we call the ASEAN centrality, and its norms and principles to realize a rules-based organization and to promote framework which are legally binding. And in terms of emergency or environmental emergencies and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, those two are the two experiences that we can share with you. And these are represented by the ASEAN Agreement in Disaster Management and Emergency Response, or what we call ADMER, and the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution. You can imagine, of course, you can understand that ASEAN is among the most region-prone regions in the world. And so disaster management, our experience in disaster management has really formed the basis of our regional integration. And on the other side is, of course, environmental emergencies, and that's represented by the major forest fires that occurred starting in the mid-90s, and it really hasn't abated. In fact, in some ways, it has increased. But the architecture of disaster management and environmental emergencies is really set through these two, I guess, phenomena. One is very much natural, and the other one is anthropogenic or human-induced. And like you was suggesting, I think we should also, we in ASEAN have realized how extreme events are causing not just massive societal changes or consequences, but other profound changes in our integration efforts, and as well as fundamental assumptions of the ASEAN community. So learning from disaster management and risk reduction efforts is very important to address what we feel are unpredictable and increasingly extreme events, and we have to make preparations in order to survive them. So building a disaster resilient society is an important principle, not just in the ASEAN Agreement for Disaster Management and Emergency Response, but also for the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution. And as we are both environmentalists and disaster management professionals and practitioners, we understand that more increasingly we've come to a much greater understanding of this convergence, the sense of convergence of sustainable development and resilience. So to us in the region and of course through the world and many other experiences have understood sustainability and resilience as taking on the defining, as these are really defining and life-changing issues in our time. And they not just touch on climate change and water scarcity, but also on issues of more economic importance, such as shortage of skills. Now, sustainability we see as very much an integral, and it's also a liberating concept that informs our development choices and approaches. And it's continually perfected through discussions in fora like this, as well as in the workplace, in schools, and even the dinner table. So we could see that the idea of discussions of sustainability is permeating through society, and the ASEAN is of course no exception. Back earlier in our foundation, we looked at the ASEAN Vision 2020, which called for a clean and green ASEAN with a fully established mechanism to ensure the protection of environment, sustainability of natural resources, and higher quality of life. And to realize the vision, the ASEAN Vision, a roadmap was constructed. But more recently, we've looking at now a post-2015 scenario in which we're building a more inclusive, resilient, sustainable community. So there's a trend now, of course, to define or redefine regional resilience in terms of the roles of traditional global partners, and to balance regional support mechanisms, operational supportive roles, allowing government and regional organizations to take leading roles, and to prepare for and adapting to risks, as well as in risk reduction to accelerate recovery and rehabilitation. More recently, in April, the ASEAN began to look at this more seriously and adopted the ASEAN Declaration to institutionalize resilience to disaster and disasters and climate change. And we looked at the need for committing to implementation, to systematizing these resilience, as well as in participating and being much more risk aware, as well as developing capacity building and to cooperate. And I wanted to, of course, share with you that in my remaining time that risk information is really now to address these persistent and emerging cross-cutting issues of climate change, disaster management, food security, energy security, pandemics, poverty, and social protection. These are the issues that we feel that more risk information policies are important. I want to maybe wrap up by saying that there is a policy, the changing policy environment, and many ASEAN countries are realizing that it's not just our urbanization and modernization and our consumption, but there's a need to prioritize these risks in our vulnerable areas. And so we're promoting a more risk and vulnerability assessment approach. It's a priority in our legal frameworks. And we're looking at also developing the disaster management organizations to analyze and prioritize risks. And our preeminent disaster management center, the AHA Center, the ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Center, is also developing a disaster monitoring and response system with U.S. assistance. And so risk and vulnerability assessment, we understand, contributes directly to disaster risk reduction and eventually to resilience. Now, I wanted to talk a bit about the Philippines, but my time is really up, and I wanted to just simply say, maybe just go straight to my last slide here, and to say that when it comes to resilience and risk information, you really have to look at this in the context of sustainable and resilient development. And so issues of narrowing the socioeconomic divide needs to be contextualized within that, preventing or reducing the occurrence of natural man-made disasters and minimizing the disasters loss. All the way down the last point, is that we need to strengthen institutional mechanisms to make them more effective in promoting sustainability, and to make sure that risk information really permeates through the different social life cycles, and that it makes a change to sustainable and consumption productions and consumption that are really also at the root cause of our need for addressing climate change and disasters. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Larry, and I'm sure if anybody wants to talk to you about Philippines or any of this other aspects, they will find you. Okay, so we have 50 minutes left. Why don't we open the floor and see if there's any questions on these last presentations? I can see 1, 2, 3 hands and 4 hands. Let me just start with the gentleman from the last session, and then I'll come to the others. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm Marwan from Jordan. I think I have 2 questions before the last presentation. I think the knowledge management, at the national level, it's very important, especially for the decision maker. But to build community resilience, to reduce risk, it's very crucial for the countries. In basic words, how can we build and integrate resilience with effective information system? This is the first question. The second one, our colleagues, I think he talks about the ecosystem and its role in disaster risk reduction. But we are having the business continuity management. What about it? And what about its role in disaster risk reduction? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, let's just collect these quickly. Please introduce yourself and try and keep your question fairly quick. You, sir, in the back corner first.
Hello, my name is Takeshi from Japan. I have a question to Hugh from OECD. Thank you for sharing your model of resilience analysis, system analysis. On the 4th step of your analysis tool is identifying the gap in the system's resilience. And one of the things that we're here to tell is our lessons from the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. And the one big failure that our country has gone through is actually not communicating that risk after identifying the risk. So the risk disclosure has been a vital sort of a key lessons for us, which we will take forward. But was wondering, you put a lot of emphasis on the risk identification, but when it comes to risk disclosure for the community members, has there been any tools developed within the OECD or the discussion around the OECD table that we can utilize for the future? Thank you.
Thank you. You, sir, in the back row.
Hi, my name's Carl Brook. I'm with the Environmental Law Institute in Washington, D.C. I was interested in particularly how ASEAN and OECD frame vulnerabilities to what. Last week, there was a conference on disaster law at Stanford, and there was an extensive discussion about the differences between man-made disasters, technological accidents, and industrial or natural disasters, with there being kind of the question of moral and legal culpability for technological disasters. And of course, NATEX blur it, and the question of coming to the nuisance or coming to the risk. So it blurs in reality, but I was wondering, these institutions, when you look at disasters, are you looking at one or the other? Does it matter? How do you parse that?
Thank you. Let's take a couple more. The lady there in front of you, just for convenience sake.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Liz Riley from the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency.
And just a question to our colleague from the OECD on the resilience model. He talked quite a bit on the resilience of assets. Could you say a little bit in terms of the resilience of human assets? Because I got the impression that we were just talking about sort of physical things and just looking to see how the social dimension is built into that model. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's take one more. There was someone over here. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Yoko from United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. One of our main objectives here is to see how we can increase resilience of refugee communities in the world who get a lot of flood, landslides every year in the camps. And interesting presentation by Mr. McLean, OECD. Thank you very much. How to operationalize the resilience. And you mentioned about strong and weak assets. And I'm very interested to know how you define strong and weak assets, and then after defining it, do you do something to keep the strongness, or do you do something to improve the weak parts? Like, what is the way forward from there? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hugh, would you like to go first? Seemed to be a lot for you there.
So I think there were 4 questions that that people asked that referred to my presentation. The first one was around, I think, the 4th step around risk disclosure and some of the issues around that. There is work ongoing in OECD and elsewhere about that. I mean, it's not an easy issue. I mean, what I would say in terms of the analysis that we've been doing, what's been very important is getting multiple stakeholders from different levels in the room together, and that does help with risk disclosure. But what I would also say is that I think we are moving to a world where it is much more difficult not to disclose risk. The increasing access to open source information means that I think issues around risk disclosure are it will become increasingly challenging to not disclose risk in a world where there is open source data, and I think there is a strong move towards open source data. There was a question to me, and I think to Larry as well, about vulnerability to what? I don't know whether you want to answer that first, Larry, just to break up. Okay. So for us, it's not so much a question about vulnerability to what. I mean, what I presented in my presentation was that the focus is on capacities. We are looking at the capacities of different layers of society to adapt, absorb, or transform in the face of risks. And what we've found in those analyses is that people do use the same sorts of capacities, maybe in different combinations, to manage and address multiple risks. So what we're seeing is that whether it's a risk of violence and conflict or a threat from a natural hazard, is that people are using a mix of capacities, whether they're human capacities, social capacities, to keep themselves safe or to keep themselves out of harm's way of those risks. So I guess my response would be the sort of risk is less important than the assets people hold and whether they use them and in what combination they use them at what level within a system. Larry?
Yeah, I really hold similar views, and I would say that you would define vulnerabilities based on who's impacted in what way. And this type of vulnerability is defined or is experienced or manifested in different ways by the different people impacted. At the national policy level, the lack of information, the lack of advice, technical advice, could impair and harm the type of policy prescription you're making. At the operational level, the field level, the subnational level, you're also, in a sense, vulnerable. And we're talking about risk information now, so this is in the context of risk information. The lack or impediments to, or the way it is generated and is produced, impacts on the way people react and respond to to the information. And what's important is going back again to the importance of defining vulnerability in terms of who is impacted the most. I think Jan Ekelund made the important point, which is we need to be looking at the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable tends to be the people that are the poorest. And I think in ASEAN we're looking at that in that context to look at how risk information should benefit the poor in terms of how they can regain sustainable livelihoods, how they can work in a new after being relocated, or when long-term displacement occurs. So there's a range of responses that one can make on this, and how risk information basically shapes the type of intervention you're going to be making. And you need to, I guess, going back to the question, we need to be much more sophisticated in defining vulnerability and how that affects, because it's affecting both decision maker and the vulnerable in obviously different ways. Yeah.
Thanks, Larry. Does anybody else like to ask a question? We have a couple of minutes left. I see one hand here. Sure, let's have one more, and another there. Let's have a comment. Okay, one question and one comment. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my question to Larry first, because in South Asia, when I attend the environmental security related meetings, always there is a severe concern and question raised is related with the sharing the information, particularly between the big countries, China, India. Often the issue comes there. And without the critical information, how possible it is to make this response is the great concern in South Asia. How you are dealing if you are facing the same problem in the ASEAN, because the SARC and we were hoping to be in the same direction like the ASEAN and at the end to the EU, but we have a serious difficulties there in sharing information and also sometimes preventing information. So that is one. And regarding the OECD's experiences of this 5-step model, is it also equally relevant for the big disaster? Because when looking to this 5 steps, it's more sequential and it's more predictable disaster. But for the big disaster, how this model works?
Thank you. And let's have the comment from the gentleman here. Be brief if you can, please, sir.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Johannes Belle, a lecturer at the Disaster Management Center in South Africa. I've been following the presentation so far, and the focus of the environment did not come so much in the presentation, which I thought should be the focus of our discussion here. Does this justify the peripheral position that the environment holds in disaster management?
Okay, thank you, sir. I had a question, and maybe this will kind of follow up to your comment for Pascal, actually. We talked a lot about this idea of extensive risk. And I think one of the problems, and maybe what you're alluding to, is it's very difficult when we have this kind of big humanitarian system and intergovernmental system that we make sure that these things are included, and it applies to your comment, and also how do we actually get this information on extensive risk into that system and taken notice of. And Alexandra, on your stuff, you mentioned this is about having a pre-positioning financing, basically for preparedness. Did you have discussions or lessons that would help us kind of scale that up, or is there an intention or an idea that this might one day be applied globally or outside the small group of organizations?
Thank you, Andy. I just wanted, before that, to answer a question from the gentleman from DC who was asking about the natural versus technological hazard. What are the differences in terms of vulnerabilities? And I think it's a very good question. I used to work a lot about natural hazards, And we wrote a lot of reports about how poverty was killing in terms of natural hazards, and it's true. We compare Nargis versus Yassi in terms of tropical cyclones. We see that poverty or bad governance associated with it kills. Although you get some poor countries like Cuba dealing pretty well with it because they got better governments in terms of disaster risk reductions. But when it comes to technological hazards, Fukushima for me was a game changer. In 2011, we launched a report of GAR. Suddenly there was this massive earthquake followed by tsunami, followed by nuclear accidents. And if you compare the tsunami 2004 in Indian Oceans and the outcomes of it, huge amount of casualties, people dying and 230,000 people dead. 2 years after that tsunami, you could come back to Koh Phi Phi in Thailand and business was back as usual. Maybe it should not be built the same way, but it was working again. After Fukushima, several years afterward, we're still dealing with a huge crisis that we can't get through. And it's in the most high-tech countries. And if it can happen in Japan, it can happen everywhere. And that's what, that's why Germany and Switzerland have pulled out of nuclear energy, because before that, okay, Chernobyl happened in Russia, everything could happen in Europe back in the old time of USSR. But now it's Japan. And that changed totally the perspective of it. And I think in terms of technological hazards, we've built so much in our industrial countries, in what we call developed countries. We build very high vulnerabilities on things we just, the disasters are waiting to happen. So this is to say that everybody is vulnerable, and even most developed countries. When it comes to extensive versus intensive risk, I think it's an upward struggle to try to keep the attentions of media and the government on something that is continuously happening. And talking about loss of biodiversity, and you were talking about the environment is not well in the pictures, you're right, it's difficult to keep the attention on deforestation, biodiversity losses, climate change, although we have the COP21 coming. But those things that are continuous hazards, you can't make the headlines all the time, and so politicians are finding themselves difficult to position themselves because it's hard to keep up with those very long-term, huge efforts that are needed. And it's a lot easier in a way to deal with one acute emergencies because that's get all the media attention. And that's why we have to find a way to also, I know all these red lights are flashing on the board of governments. We will also have to find a way to keep those slow onset but continuous hazard into the pictures.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, in fact, we start at the moment in our pilot countries first, depending on the different setups on local level. But from the beginning on, we try as well to include all different authorities, and then it depends very much on the different setups how actors are ready to work together. And the final idea of the Federal Foreign Office is to scale it up, so to bring the idea of forecast-based financing to different donors. And that's why as well partners like OCHA is in the boat. And on the other hand, we are not only thinking about international donors, but also on national level to establish, for example, kind of preparedness funds managed by the countries. And this would be a much more sustainable way to deal with increasing risks. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra. Okay, so time we wrapped up a little bit. Just wanted to very quickly maybe go through 2 or 3 things which I noted that came out of it. Firstly, we had a lot of questions and discussion about the local level and the role of local people, how that knowledge can inform our risk analysis, and also in the other direction how they should be part of it and be informed of the other information that's available. Secondly, and particularly from Birgitta's work on how we really tell that story with the information for the decision maker in an attractive way, and I particularly liked your example of the advertising. Maybe that's something that we just wouldn't think of, that is a good lesson. On the extensive risk, how do we really think of ways to kind of get this as part of the picture? It was mentioned a few times, how do we bring in the science? I think it was in Alexandra's presentation. How do we actually create that forum, bring in the scientists? I think it also applies to all the other different kind of communities or sectors that we work with. Came out a few times also this idea, I suppose, of information preparedness. A lot of this stuff, it just doesn't work to rush and try and get it together after there's been a disaster or an emergency. We need to find a way to kind of pre-position that stuff, whether it's for insurance purposes or analysis purposes or whatever. And from Larry's presentation as well, this idea of the kind of the transboundary phenomenon, and also from your comment there, politically, you know, how do we make sure that where this information is available, how is it open and shared across countries? So, and then lastly, the final comment I had, which was kind of came from Hugh's presentation, was this idea of a boundary tool, I suppose you could call it. I mean, we have this concept of boundary organizations for, you know, translating scientific information for decision makers. The tool you presented is really a way to take that basic information and make an action plan out of it. So maybe that's something that we can think about as a means to take action using this information. So last, thank you very much to all the panelists. And one final comment I wanted to make: tomorrow we will have a very informal lunch. We will just get together during the buffet. So that's an opportunity for those panelists who are still here. Any of you who are interested in taking this conversation further, please come and join us. So thank you very much for your questions, and panelists, thank you again for your contributions.